Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
According to the Bible, marriage is a long-term binding commitment epitomized by a covenantal contract. Marriage is a long-term binding commitment epitomized by a covenantal contract. Marriage is not merely about feelings of emotion and love, because emotions and love, they're going to fluctuate.
Today with Jeff Vines, pastor, apologist, and Bible teacher.
Hi, and welcome to Today with Jeff Vines. On this episode, we're talking about marriage. Pastor Jeff says, looking at marriage helps us to understand what the love of God is like. If you've missed any episodes or want to share them with friends, you can find all messages wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search for Today with Jeff Vines. Here's Pastor Jeff and how to fix your marriage.
Well, I am glad to be here, and I'm glad you're here. I'm going to read a passage from Ephesians 5, and most of you are going to be familiar with it, but over the last 20, 30 years, as I've encountered challenges in my own marriage, I've gone back to this passage and try to get a better understanding of what the writer intends to communicate. And so let me read it first. I'm going to stop along the way, but let me read it. It says, and this is the verse, most people start at verse 22, but verse 21 says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Most people like to start with wives, submit to your husbands. But from the get-go, it's a mutual submission. And the word means to create space. So there's a sense in which both the husband and the wife, once you get married, you're supposed to create space for each other. But for what purpose do you create that space? Verse 22, he singles in on the wives. He says, wives, submit to your husbands, your own husbands, as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. So we'll get to the nitty-gritty in a moment, but the one thing we've tried to say during this whole series is the most important decision you'll ever make in your life is the one about marriage. Other than your commitment to Christ, the most important decision you'll make is marriage. So if you approach the marriage with kind of a cavalier attitude of, hey, you know what, I'm not sure this will work, but let's give it a try. And if it doesn't work, we'll divorce or we'll separate. If you go into the marriage like that, what I've been trying to say is the marriage never works. It never works. It never turns out the way you think it's going to turn out. And you can have a great season from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And that's why we're told that if a marriage makes it into the 6th year, it has 3, 4 times a chance of making it for good if you get past those years. But a lot of couples don't make it past those years because of the attitude with which they approach marriage. The other thing about this is the Bible talks about God hating divorce, but he doesn't hate divorced people. I'm sure you've heard that. But once you go through a broken family or broken marriage, the wounds that occur in you are not easily healed, which is why, over 70% of second marriages and over 80% of third marriages don't work. So there's some wound that happens in you when you give your heart to another person and you go in with these unrealized expectations, or you go in with expectations that are typically just not realistic. And then you go into the marriage relationship and you realize about 4 or 5 years in that these expectations are never going to come to fruition. And so something happens in you there. And if you don't go the right direction and make the right decisions at that point, then the relationship starts to go this way, which we'll talk about why in a moment. And if it breaks, if the relationship ends, no matter what culture, society tells us, we now know different. And that is that there's wounds that happened in the lives of people that go with them the rest of their lives. Now, can Jesus give you grace and mercy? And can healing come? Well, of course it can. But you just have to understand there are wounds that happen in a broken marriage that you carry with you through the rest of your life that will impact every relationship you have after a broken family or broken marriage. So what I want to deal with in this next message is, what do you do when the marriage is not going the way you thought it would? But wait, Pastor Jeff, you said it never does, and it doesn't. Therefore, since you now know that it will not go the way you think it should go or would go, what do? I remember speaking with my mother when I think my mom was in her mid-50s, and I could tell that my mom and dad were struggling. So I've got two strong Christian parents brought up with the idea that you do not divorce under any circumstances. And yet I see my mother drifting away little by little by little. And finally one day I said to my mother, who I was really close to, I said, Mom, what's going on? I said, are you angry at Dad? Are you hurt? I can tell something's not right. And my mother said something to me. And I think at that moment, just for a moment, she forgot I was her son and she did treat me as pastor. She said, I wish I was angry. What do you mean? She goes, I'm numb. I feel nothing. I don't feel anger. I don't feel sad. I don't feel anything. Now, I know it's rare, but I was able to actually coach my own parents through this process because I knew something was missing. And a big part of it, you got to understand, in my father's generation, you didn't tell your wife you loved her. You just, and you didn't show any kind of public display of affection in those days. That was a very private thing. The problem is the love language of most women has never changed. And it varies between 1, 2, and 3 of the love languages. And one, it's typically quality time. I need time with you. Or for some women, it's gifts of affection, a gift that shows me that you really do care. But for a lot of women, it's not even gifts of affection. It's not only, it's quality time plus acts of service. I want to know that you're serving me and the family. So in my father's mind, he comes from a generation that says, hey, I don't have to tell you I love you because I go to work 40, 50 hours a week and I come home and I support this family. That's my love language. That's my way of saying I love you. And if you want acts of service, I'll give you acts of service 50 hours a week in the plant, in the warehouse. So those two generations come together, and what you have is just two people who tolerate each other, and over time they start to grow apart. And that's exactly what had happened with my parents. Now, my parents' case, they went to a counselor. Because my dad was incredibly humble, when the counselor pointed out his faults, my dad humbled himself and said, man, I've got to change my attitude and my actions. Both of them did. They came together, and then the latter years of their marriage were the best years. And that was a good thing because my mother only lived to be 61 years old, so they only had about 5 good years before my mom passed away. Now, what's the point of all this? There is absolutely no way that we can know what we're supposed to be like, act like, what we should expect about marriage, unless we answer the question is what is the essence of marriage? I mean, if God truly ordained this thing called marriage, why did he do it? And what's the purpose of marriage? If you don't know the end goal, there's no way you can know or measure anything. Are we achieving what we're supposed to be achieving? Are we marching towards success? So that's what I want to do in this third part. I want to answer 3 questions. The first I want to answer is, what is the essence of marriage? According to the Bible, if you care, now if you're not a Christ follower, you're not going to care about this. But if you're a Christ follower and you gave your life to Jesus, then the question is, in God's eyes, what is the essence of marriage? So doing a lot of marriage counseling over the course of my life, one of the common things that I hear is a young woman will come to me. It's usually the young woman, not the young man. And they will say to me, my husband keeps saying, I want to get married, but my husband keeps saying, why do I need a piece of paper? Why do I need a piece of paper? Now, and I always translate that for the young woman. I'll say, here, let me translate that. I love you, but not enough to bind myself to you. That's what he's saying. He's smart. He knows what marriage means. And here's the essence of marriage. Here's the definition, and I'll repeat it. According to the Bible, marriage is a long-term binding commitment epitomized by a covenantal contract. Marriage is a long-term binding commitment epitomized by a covenantal contract. Marriage is not merely about feelings of emotion and love, because emotions and love, they're going to fluctuate. Sometimes you're going to look at your husband and say, you are so handsome. Other days you're going to look at him and say, well, can you not do something with your hair? Or can you just change your attitude? The ebb and flow of life is like this. Some days you're going to feel so in love. Other days you're not going to feel so much in love, and actually you want nothing to do with him. Marriage is about how you act when the feelings are not there. That's what marriage is. Now, there are 2 kinds of relationship, right? And this is true of anything. So you've got the consumer relationship and the covenant. The consumer is kind of the one you have with your grocer. You know, if your grocer gives you good price and good produce, you go to your grocer. But if a better grocer down the road gives you a better price and better produce, you're not committed to the other grocer. You're going to go, your individual needs are more important than the relationship with the grocer. But covenant is different. Covenant is the type of the relationship that you have with your children. So if you're not a young mother yet, when you become a young mother, one of the first things you're going to realize is how much is required from the kids without any gratitude. And there's almost expectation and entitlement. You know, you're feeding, you're clothing, you're changing diaper again and again and again. Because, and you know, here's the thing. Even though you give so much, you give to the child, you would never think about taking the child over to the next door neighbor and dropping him on the doorstep. And do you know why? Because you're in a covenant relationship, not a consumer one. And when you're in a covenant relationship, you don't abandon the relationship when things aren't going the way you think it should go. And if you did abandon the child, you'd probably be arrested. Now, when you're dating another person, during the dating process, you're in the consumer relationship. I mean, you're kicking the tires. You're test driving. You're in the marketing and promotion phase. And you're trying to figure out, you're showing your strengths, you're hiding your weaknesses, you're trying to figure out, do I want to take this home or not? But after you've kicked the tires long enough and you come to the decision that you're satisfied with the product, maybe it's not perfect, but you're satisfied, then you sign on the dotted line. In the dating relationship, you're a consumer. But in the marriage relationship, you're in covenant. So in a covenant relationship, here's what you're basically doing. When you enter marriage, now this is in God's eyes, this is according to Scripture, and we'll get to that. So according to the biblical concept of marriage, it's when two people say to each other, okay, you got all the goods on me and you have all the bads on me, and I have all the goods on you and all the bads on you, at least as much as I can right now. So here's what we're going to do. In this Christian marriage, both of us as partners are going to say, I now reject the consumer mentality of this relationship and now choose to enter into a covenant relationship. So my commitment to you in the future is not going to be based upon how I feel or the ebb and flow of my emotions. Instead, my commitment to you is going to be based on a covenant that I have now made with you. I desire to create intimacy and stability in the other person's life. I'm not merely giving you my word that I'm going to stay with you. I'm binding myself with this covenant and this contract that I'm committed to you, no matter how I feel. Now, part of that is because God says that to us. You know, God says, I will never leave you or forsake you, that I will never leave you orphan. God enters into us, into a covenant agreement with us. And it's not based on how He feels. I'm sure there are times if God feels, He wouldn't be very happy with us. But He responds to us on the basis of the covenant He made with us. And so the Christian marriage is supposed to work primarily the same way. Do any of you remember reading the famous myth Ulysses? Do you remember? And Ulysses, the boat would go by this island and the sirens would call out. So he knew that when the ship goes by the island, that if he didn't restrict himself somehow, the temptations may be so strong that he didn't trust himself. So he bound himself to the mast. So that when they went by the island, even if his desires were pulling him away, he couldn't get loose. In marriage, both partners agree that they're going to bind themselves to the mast, knowing that future temptations, and I'm not talking about sexual temptations, although that's probably part of it too. I'm talking about the temptation to walk away, the temptation to say, this person was not who I thought he was or she was. They're not as mature as I thought they would be. He's always working. You know, she is not very good with intimacy, or she withholds intimacy, or his family brings too much baggage, whatever. You're making the commitment because you moved into a covenant relationship. You're assuming that there are going to be times in your life that you're not going to feel like being committed to this man or woman, but you are, because you entered a covenant. You're no longer in a consumer relationship. So in the Christian marriage, two people agree that love and intimacy, now this is important, two people agree that love and intimacy are just as much an act of the will as it is an emotion. I want you to think about that for a moment. Hardest thing that I had to get my head around. Love is emotion, but love is also an act of the will, which means you can choose to love someone even when you don't feel like it. Now, that's not just the Bible saying that. I mean, that's part of your vows. Isn't that what you promised? The vows? I so-and-so take you so to be my husband or wife, to have and to whole, for richer, for poorer, sickness and in health. Whatever it is, I bind myself, I commit to you, I'm entering into a covenant to you. You're basically in your marriage vow saying that you're not going to make a decision based on your emotions or your feelings, but upon a covenant. Now, there's a great psychologist named Noam Spencer, and he writes an article called Action Creates Emotion. And this guy's not a believer now. This is just something that we learn in psychology. And basically the article says this: you want to change how you're feeling? Change what you're doing. Wow. Now, I'm going to read the quote. It's a good quote. He says, many people assume that the link between emotion and behavior is one way. Emotions shape behavior. You love him, therefore you kiss him. You hate him, therefore you hit him. This view, he says, is incorrect. In fact, the relationship is reciprocal. Much of the time, behavior actually shapes emotion. You ever wonder why so often the actor and the actress who play a couple in a movie fall in love on the set? Multiple processes are involved, to be sure, but both are usually young and attractive. They have a lot in common. They hang around each other a lot to film this movie. All these are known predictors of mate selection. But they also do love scenes together. They have to act like people who care deeply for each other. They look into each other's eyes. They touch each other. They act out the behaviors of love. No wonder the emotion in love often follows. Recent research in clinical psychology has shown that the fastest way to change an emotion is to change the behavior attached to it. That's amazing. You see what he's saying? Acting out the covenant of marriage actually ends up creating in you a deep, intimate emotion for your spouse. So, okay, well, Jeff, how does one act out the covenant of marriage? By committing to love the other person for better, for worse, when things are not going well. When there's financial struggles, life struggles, health struggles, emotional struggles, you continue to express love because of the covenant that you made. And now when I go through this with young couples or even middle-aged couples who are having a lot of problems in the marriage, and I say something like that, oh man, you can see the look on their faces. Oh man, you're telling me I got to act like I love this guy? And then I say, and I can tell by the body language, and I'll say, what's the problem? He goes, man, that's going to take a lot of humility. Yep. Sacrifice. And then I like to read Philippians 2 to them. If they're both believers, we're supposed to model the behavior of Jesus. And probably nothing describes Jesus' behavior toward us than humility and sacrifice. So when a young man tells a young woman or middle-aged, older, whatever, it's just a piece of paper, what that person means is, I want to keep my options open in case things turn worse. And I want to tell you something. If that's your attitude, you will never experience the most precious gifts associated with covenant relationship. This is what this generation doesn't get. When your husband or wife knows you're in a covenant relationship with them, it creates a sense of security and trust. And guess what happens next? Intimacy. Full intimacy only happens when there's security and trust, and you know the other's in a covenantal relationship with you. And by the way, it also brings freedom. Now, when I say that, someone will say, whoa. A covenant brings freedom? It seems to me that the marriage covenant is the end of all freedom. Lewis Smedes, who's kind of an author, comedian, he says, when I make a promise, I'm committing to rise above all the wacky stuff I got from my parents. It took me a while to get that. He's saying, my emotions come from my parents, my attitudes come from my parents. I am so like my mother and father. But when I make a covenant, what I'm saying is, I don't care about all that. All I care about is this. I am committed to this marriage relationship. And if you don't know the discipline of making a promise, I don't think you can ever understand marriage, because the marriage vows say that I will promise to be faithful, loving, serving, regardless of my feelings in the future. I mean, you think about that. That's a big ask, isn't it? Because usually we think, well, my emotions got to be good. If my emotions are not good, why would I? If I don't feel love, why would I stay in this relationship? Here's the answer. You will feel love if you stay in the relationship and live as though you're in the covenant. As you express love by an act of the will, the emotions will be sure to follow. You don't need the Bible to tell you that. We were just told that by psychology. That's how it goes. It's reciprocal. So, again, somebody will say, he wants to live with me, but he doesn't want to marry me. He loves me, but he doesn't want to marry me. And the translation again is, I love you, but I don't love you enough to marry you. I love you, but I don't love you enough to lose my independence. I love you, but I don't love you enough to be bound to you. And sometimes I'll say that and someone will say, no, you're wrong, Pastor Jeff. It's a financial issue. Really? How long have you been dating? 7 years. 7 years. And he tells you it's a financial issue. Tell me something. During this, has he bought a new car? New golf clubs? New clothes? Oh, yeah. So he'll sacrifice, just not for you. The point is, the Christian marriage is not one of consumerism, but it's one of covenant, and only in covenant can you have true intimacy. Okay, now that was the first one. That's the big one. The other two go very quickly. The second one is this. What is the mission of marriage? What are you hoping to accomplish in marriage? Well, I want to have fun. I want to have somebody to grow old with, romance. We want to merge our net worth, all of that, which when I married Robin, our net worth was negative. So what is the mission of marriage? Here is the Christian goal of marriage right here. Deep character change through deep relationship. Deep character change through deep relationship. In Romans 8, most of us know the passage in verse 28 where we're told that God will work everything to good for those who love God, called according to His purpose. And then the next verse 29 says, for those whom God predestined, He foreknew to be conformed to the image of His Son. When Paul writes Ephesians 5, one of the things he has in mind, and I'll show you just in a moment, is that perhaps the mission of marriage, maybe not the only mission, well, definitely not the only mission, but a large part of the mission of marriage is for you to enter into the covenant of marriage with a deep friend who's going to help you become like Christ. Man, there's no other relationship on earth that will help you become more like Jesus than your spouse. Because there are going to be times you want to kill them. I mean, I make jokes about that, but I just got through watching like 30 episodes of Dateline because I was sick for 4 days. And it's always the spouse who commits the murder. I mean, who gets that? Why don't you just leave them or divorce them? Why do you kill them? Well, the point is you're going to have emotions that run so high. When you get married, whatever emotions you brought into the marriage, they're going to go on warp speed. If you struggle with your temper's going to get worse. If you struggle with feelings of rejection, those feelings are going to get worse because you've given your life, you're in the deepest relationship you've ever been. So all your emotions are on warp speed now. So if you don't enter the marriage understanding that part of the reason God has brought you, so when people say opposites attract, well, of course they do. Because if you married somebody like you'd never grow. But if you marry someone that's opposite to you, they're going to point your flaws out, you're going to point theirs out, hopefully in a gentle, grace-filled way. But one of the missions of marriage is God brings two people together, iron sharpening iron, so that you can help each other through deep character change through a deep friendship. Now, eHarmony disagrees with me. eHarmony says that people today are looking for the perfectly compatible soulmate. And the definition as they put it is this: someone who will accept me just as I am, and I can appreciate her or him just as she is or he is. So the survey says this is the new definition of soulmate. Someone who will not try to change me, someone who will accept me as I am. Now, I've told young people 1,000 times, if that's your definition of marriage, that's why you're not married. Because there's nobody, that person doesn't exist. And you may be trying to pose as somebody like that, but you're not like that either. When you come into the marriage, both couples, both spouse, both male and female, into the marriage bring all of their flaws. And most of the flaws, and our friends have told us this for a long time, but now it's starting to dawn on us, maybe they were right. Our flaws are intense. So we may be a little proud with selfish tendencies. We may be inflexible with a tendency to be demanding. We may be undisciplined with a tendency to be unreliable. We may be impatient and irritable with a tendency to hold grudges. Everybody has them. When you come into the marriage relationship, all your relational flaws, insensitivity, insecurity, insanity, whatever it is, and again, people have been telling you this all your life, suddenly, you haven't taken it seriously, but suddenly you get it. Flaws that created small problems before marriage now create huge problems.
You've been listening to Today with Jeff Vines. Thanks for joining us. Next time, we'll bring you the rest of this message from Pastor Jeff.
When God looks at us, He sees us as saints. We've been made holy and washed clean by the Word because of the sacrifice Jesus made on the cross. That generosity that He gave us, when God looks at us, He sees us as pure and righteous. It's an amazing thing. Well, that's what marriage is, really. We continue to love each other, even though we feel sometimes the other is unlovable. And through the act of the will of love, the emotions will follow.
You can listen to more messages like this. Just search for Today with Jeff Vines wherever you get your podcasts.
You make me wanna dance and sing.
Today.
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 Today with Jeff Vines.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.